So here I am by the fire. All right, I'm doing my best. Why not? So usually, in the day before Christmas break, I read one of my favorite Christmas stories, and I wasn't about to let 2020 take that away. So I'm going to read one of my favorite Christmas stories right here by the fire. Now, the story is called The Gift of the Magi. Now, a little bit of background about why this is really one of my favorite Christmas stories. It goes all the way back to when I was in seventh grade. I had a social studies teacher who was an incredibly tough guy. He was you did not mess with this social studies teacher that I had. He was yeah, uh, an intense dude. Um, but I learned a lot from him, as usually happens when you have a really tough teacher. You usually wind up learning a lot from him. Well, I learned that the guy had a heart because he chose to read this story to us. Now, if you don't know this about seventh graders, uh, they are they are challenging. Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. And when I was in seventh grade, our class was challenging, and he was, like I said, he was a tough teacher, but he read to us this story, and here it is. All of these years later, it is a long, 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 long. I'm old. Long time since I was in seventh grade, and this story still has such meaning to me. Not just because the story is very meaningful, but because, well, it was read to me by that teacher who, like I said, he was very tough, and it was surprising that this story would come, that he would choose to tell us this story. Now, it does have a bit of history to it. This story was written well over 100 years ago, so this is a very old story. But it is. You probably have even heard this story or seen this story. It's been around for a very long time, so you might have even seen this story in cartoon version or something like that. So I, I hope that hearing the original text will go, oh, that's where that cartoon or that's where that comes from. So maybe it will. And yeah, I think honestly, this is it's a touching story, and I really, it is. It's one of my favorite Christmas stories. So it's called "The Gift of the Magi" by an author named O. Henry, and he's not related to Mr. Henry. I point this way because Mr. Henry's on the other side of that wall. Still can't get over this fireplace. But anyway, and the story being such a long time ago. Um, it talks about money here, and it really doesn't sound like a lot of money. It really isn't. But we're talking 1890s, 1900 kind of time frame. So this is a very long time ago that this story takes place. This is even from before I was born. Okay, so The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry. $1.87. That was all, and 60 cents of it was in pennies. Pennies saved one and two at a time by bulldozing the grocer and the vegetable man and the butcher until one's cheeks burned with the silent imputation of parsimony that such close dealing implied. 3 times Della counted it. $1.87, and the next day would be Christmas. There was clearly nothing to do but to flop down on the shabby little couch and howl. So Della did it, which instigates the moral reflection that life is made up of sobs, sniffles, and smiles, with sniffles predominating. While the mistress of the home is gradually subsiding from the first stage to the second, let's take a look at the home. A furnished apartment at $8 per week. It didn't exactly beggar description, but it certainly had that word on the lookout for the Mendicity squad. In the vestibule below was a mailbox into which no letter would go, and an electric button from which no mortal finger could coax a ring. Also, appertaining thereunto was a card bearing the name Mr. James Dillingham Young. The Dillingham had been flown to the breeze during a former period of prosperity, when its possessor was being paid $30 per week. Now, with income shrunk to just $20, the letters of the Dillingham look blurred, as though they were thinking seriously of contracting to a modest and unassuming D. But whenever Mr. Dillingham Young came home and reached his apartment above, he was called Jim and greatly hugged by Mrs. James Dillingham Young, already introduced to you as Della, which is all very good. Della finished her cry and attended to her cheeks with a powder rag. She stood by the window and looked out dully at a gray cat walking a gray fence in a gray backyard. By the way, I mean, come on, how depressing does that sound? A gray cat, a gray fence, a gray backyard in a gray of winter time. I mean, sorry, back to the story. Tomorrow would be Christmas Day, and she had only $1.87 with which to buy Jim a present. She had been saving every penny she could for months with this result. $20 a week doesn't go far. Expenses had been greater than she had calculated. They always are. Only $1.87 to buy a present for Jim, her Jim. Many a happy hour she had spent planning for something nice for him, something fine and rare and sterling, something just a bit near to being worthy of the honor of being owned by Jim. There was a mirror between the windows of the room. Perhaps you've seen such a mirror in an $8 flat. A very thin and very agile person may, by observing his reflection in a rapid sequence of longitudinal strips, obtain a fairly accurate conception of his looks. Della, being slender, had mastered the art. Suddenly she whirled from the window and stood before the glass. Her eyes were shining brilliantly, but her face had lost its color within 20 seconds. Rapidly, she pulled down her hair and let it fall to the full length. Now, there were two possessions of the James Dillingham Young in which they both took a mighty pride. One was Jim's gold watch that had been his father's and his grandfather's. The other was Della's hair. Had the Queen of Sheba lived in the apartment across the air shaft, Della would have let her hair hang out of the window some day, just to depreciate Her Majesty's jewels and gifts. Had King Solomon been the janitor, with all of the treasures piled up in the basement, Jim would have pulled out his watch every time he passed, just to see him pluck at his beard in envy. Which, by the way, the watch we're talking about is a pocket watch. It's not a wrist watch, pocket watch. Like I said, it's a very old story. Now Della's beautiful hair fell about her, rippling and shining like a cascade of brown waters. It reached below her knee and made itself almost a garment for her. And then she did it up again, nervously and quickly. Once she faltered for a minute and stood while a tear or two dropped on the worn red carpet. On went her old brown jacket. On went her old brown hat. With a whirl of skirts and with the brilliant sparkle still in her eyes, she fluttered out the door and down the stairs to the street. Where she stopped, the sign read, Madame Sofroni, hair goods of all kinds. Up one flight Della ran and collected herself, panting. Madame, large, too white, chilly, hardly looked the Sofroni. Will you buy my hair? Asked Della. I buy hair, said Madame. Take your hat off and let's have a look at the sights of it. Down rippled the brown cascade. $20, said Madame, lifting the mass with a practiced hand. Give it to me quick, said Della. Oh, the next 2 hours tripped by on rosy wings. Forget the hash metaphor. She was ransacking the stores looking for Jim's present. She found it at last. It surely had been made just for Jim and for no one else. There was none other like it in any of the stores, and she had turned them all inside out. It was a platinum fob chain, simple and chaste in design, properly proclaiming its value by substance alone and not by ornamentation. As all good things should do, it was even worthy of the watch. So the idea is it's a pocket watch, right? So it's a chain that would hold the pocket watch. So that's what she has found for Jim. But as soon as she saw it, she knew that it must be Jim's. It was like him, quietness and value. The description applied to them both. $21 they took from her for it, and she hurried home with the 87 cents. With that chain on his watch, Jim might be properly anxious about the time in any company. Grand as the watch was, he sometimes looked at it on the sly on account of the old leather strap that he used in place of a chain. When Della reached home, her intoxication gave way to a little prudence and reason. She got out her curling irons and lighted the gas and went to work repairing the ravages made by generosity added to love, which is always a tremendous task, dear friends, a mammoth task. Within 40 minutes, her head was covered with her head was covered with tiny, close-lying curls that made her look wonderfully like a truant schoolboy. She looked at her reflection in the mirror long, carefully, and critically. If Jim doesn't kill me, she said to herself, before he takes a second look at me, he'll say I look like a Coney Island chorus girl. But what could I do? Oh, what could I do with only $1.87? So you get that, right? She had this long brown hair. She sold her hair for $20 so she could buy Jim the watch fob. So now she looks completely different with short hair. I look, but anyway. At 7 o'clock, the coffee was made and the frying pan was on the back of the stove and ready to cook the chops. Jim was never late. Della doubled the fob chain in her hand and sat on the corner of the table near the door that he always entered. She heard the step on the stairway down on the first flight. She turned white just for a moment. She had a habit of saying little prayers about the simplest everyday things, and now she whispered, "Please, God, make him think I'm still pretty." The door opened and Jim stepped in and closed it. He looked thin and very serious. Poor fellow, he was only 22 and to be burdened with a family. He needed a new overcoat and he was without gloves. Jim stepped inside the door, as immovable as a setter at the scent of quail. His eyes were fixed on Della. And there was an expression in him that Della could not read, and it terrified her. It was not anger, nor surprise, nor disapproval, nor horror, or any of the sentiments that she had been prepared for. He simply stared at her, fixedly, with that peculiar expression on his face. Della wriggled off the table and went for him. "Jim, darling," she cried, "don't look at me that way. I had my hair cut off, and I sold it because I couldn't have lived through Christmas without giving you a present. It'll grow out again. You won't mind, will you? I just had to do it. My hair grows awfully fast. Say Merry Christmas, Jim, and let's be happy. You don't know what a beautiful, nice gift I've got for you." "You've cut off your hair?" asked Jim, laboriously, as if he had not arrived at that patent fact yet, even after the hardest mental labor. "Cut it off and sold it," said Della. "Don't you love me just as much as well anyhow? I'm me without my hair, ain't I?" Jim looked around the room curiously. "You say your hair is gone," he said, almost with an air of idiocy. "You needn't look for it," said Della. "It's sold, I tell you, sold and gone. It's Christmas Eve, boy. Be good to me, for it went to you for you. Maybe the hairs on my head were numbered," she went on with a sudden serious sweetness. "But nobody could ever count my love for you. Shall I put the chops on, Jim?" Out of his trance, Jim seemed quickly to wake. He enfolded his Della. For 10 seconds, let us regard with discreet scrutiny some inconsequential object in the other direction. $8 a week or $1 million a year, what's the difference? A mathematician or a wit would give you the wrong answer. The Magi brought valuable gifts, but that was not among them. This dark assertion will be illuminated later on. Jim drew a package from his overcoat and threw it on the table. Don't make any mistake, Dell, about me, he said. I don't think there's anything in the way of a haircut that could make me like my girl any less. But if you'll unwrap that package, you may see why you had me going a little while at first. White fingers and nimble tore at the package, at the string in the paper. And then an ecstatic scream of joy. Ah! And then a quick feminine change to hysterical tears and wails, necessitating the immediate employment of all of the comforting powers of the Lord of the Flat. For there lay the combs. The set of combs, side and back, that Della had worshipped for so long in a Broadway window. Beautiful combs, pure tortoise shell, with jeweled rims, just the shade to wear in her beautifully vanished hair. They were expensive combs. She knew, and her heart had simply craved and yearned over them without the least hope of possession. And now they were hers. But the hair that she would have worn them in was now gone. But she hugged them to herself, and at length she was able to look up with dim eyes and smile and say, "My hair grows so fast, Jim." And then Dell leaped up like a singed cat and said, "Oh, oh!" Jim had not yet seen his beautiful present. She held it out to him eagerly with her open palm. The dull, precious metal seemed to flash with a reflection of her bright and ardent spirit. "Isn't it a dandy, Jim? I hunted all over town to find it. You'll have to look at your watch 100 times a day now. Give me your watch. I want to see how it looks on it." Instead of obeying, Jim tumbled down on the couch and put his hands under his back and head and smiled. "Dell, let's put our Christmas presents away and keep them a while. They're too nice to use just as presents. I sold the watch to get the money to buy your combs. And now suppose you put the chops on." The Magi, as you know, were wise men, wonderfully wise men who brought gifts to the babe in the manger. They invented the art of giving Christmas presents. Being wise, their gifts were no doubt wise ones, possibly bearing the privilege of exchange in case of duplication. And here I have lamely related to you the uneventful chronicle of two foolish children in an apartment who most unwisely sacrificed for each other the greatest treasures of their house. But in a last word to the wise of these days, let it be said that all who give gifts, these two were the wisest. Of all who give and receive gifts such as they are wisest. Everywhere they are wisest. They are the Magi. So, like I said, I hope that you enjoyed the story. I know that when I first heard it, I was shocked that 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 mean seventh grade teacher was reading that story to us. It's a touching story, and I hope that I hope you have a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. Enjoy the break. You've earned it, and I'm looking forward to what the rest of the school year is going to bring. And well, you know how I'm going to end this video. Aloha.